Okay. Hey, everybody. Just going to wait. Do I know for sure that I'm live? There we go. I know for sure that I'm live. And it's so handy that my cell phone tells me that I'm live too. I'm going to go ahead and tag a couple people here because I know some people were. I don't know how to do all that. I still don't know how to do all that. Oh. All right. Who cares? Okay. I'm going to get this going. Yep. My second video for today. And we're going back to back. We did part 6 last night. We looked at the idea of common grace and recovery. And tonight we are going to be covering gluttony and temperance. Gluttony and temperance. This is going to be part 7 of the Bible-based recovery series. I wanted to do this tonight because it's the Thanksgiving holiday next week, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get anything done on Thursday. I mean, I think it would be crazy to even try to do anything on Thursday. And then my family is actually doing our gathering on Friday. So I won't be doing it on Friday, obviously. But that's why I'm doing it this week. I'm doing back to back so we can keep plugging away. For those who are interested, we can keep plugging away on this Bible-based recovery series before I jump into Advent for a few messages. I really would like to tag some people here, but I'm not that savvy. Okay, well, hopefully someone will come on live here and share this with a couple groups. Oh, before we jump into the message, let's look at our prayer. Again, I'm using this Book of Common Worship Daily Prayer. And I think today we're going to be doing a prayer for the mentally distressed. Mentally distressed. Mighty God, in Jesus Christ, you dealt with spirits that darken minds or set people against themselves. Give peace to those who are torn by conflict, are cast down, or dream deceiving dreams. By your power, drive from our minds demons that shake confidence and wreck love. Tame unruly forces in us and bring us to your truth, so that we may accept ourselves as good, glad children of your love, known in Jesus Christ. I'm going to text one more person because I told him I would. Alrighty, here we go. Gluttony and temperance. Mind me, kind of got the sniffles a little bit. Okay, gluttony and temperance. Let's go. All right. Got 2 opening texts for you guys. They're from Proverbs, and then I got an opening text from Ed Welsh. Quote, be not among drunkards or gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. That's Proverbs 23:20-21. We also got Proverbs 28:7. The one who keeps the law is a son with understanding, but a companion of glutton shames his father. A companion of glutton shames his father. And here's the quote from Ed Welsh. Whatever you call it, greed, lust, obsessions, cravings, being out of control, addicts are owned by their desires and reckless indulgence. Of the 7 deadly sins, 3, avarice or greed, gluttony, and lust, are devoted to excesses. In fact, sin itself can be summarized as I want more. It is a reckless consumer. And that's page 202 from his Banquets in a Grave. All right, jumping into this. Before I do that, though, just so you know, this might be a little rough. This isn't as polished as they normally are. barely just finished it at work today, and I didn't really have much time to edit. I got home late, and then my wife left almost immediately when I got home, and it was me and the kids, so I had barely just enough time to fix some of the typos. But besides that, it's just going to be maybe a little more rough than usual. Alrighty, here we go. A while ago, a friend and I were working on a writing project entitled Life on God's Terms, Recovery and the Puritans. It's a book I'd love to someday release, but I'm waiting for the right time. But it was called Life on God's Terms, Recovery and the Puritans. As the title suggests, the project focused on the Puritans and how we believe that their various writings are useful for people in recovery. In writing this project, we covered topics such as prayer, self-examination, the family, service, and other ideas which pertain to the recovery circles. We reached a point in the project when we knew that we wanted to add a few more topics, but we weren't sure which ones to add. So I suggested that we do a write-up about gluttony. My friend did not agree with my suggestion. He stated that he did not have a problem with gluttony, and because of this, he couldn't do a write-up on it. He didn't want to write on a subject unless he had direct experience with it. While I know that this is a common idea in modern recovery, I do not believe that our experiences should limit our helpfulness to our fellows. I do believe that experience is important for building bridges of empathy, like in Romans 12:15. I'm not denying that one bit. Ruka, come here, girl. Come on. But if the Bible states that gluttony is a sin, it should be addressed by recovery workers. It should be addressed whether we feel we have struggled in this area, which I would say that we all have. Be calm, dog. Whether or not we struggled in this area, and this goes for all sins, really. In modern recovery, we just don't hear much talk about gluttony. We mostly focus on compulsive behaviors such as drunkenness, or drug abuse, or pornography addiction. Take Ed Welch's popular title, Banquets in the Grave, for example. In that book, there are just 2 mentions of the word glutton and 47 uses of the word drunk or drunkenness. The AA basic text mentions gluttony about 3 times, but they use the word drunk close to 60 times. The Narcotics Anonymous basic text doesn't even mention it 1 time, and neither does Eating Disorders Anonymous, which I think is kind of ironic. Ironically, this is also ironic. It's all kind of ironic. Ironically, the Life Recovery Bible doesn't explicitly mention it or really cover it at any of the relevant passages. My dog is. Ruka, come here. Stop. Ruka, what do you want? Come on, pup. Make me look bad. All right. The Life Recovery Bible doesn't say hi to everybody, Ruka. This page is just getting more and more mom and pop by the day. All right. Ironically, the Life Recovery Bible doesn't explicitly mention it or really cover it at any other relevant passages. J. Keith Miller's classic title, Hunger for Healing, a book that we've used here before and recovered, mentions it only 1 time, and it's in a quote from AA. But it mentions the word drug or drunk over 26 times. So, you see my point? Modern recovery may not speak on gluttony often, but the Bible certainly does. Because of this, we have to familiarize ourselves with the subject and the relevant passages. In the long run, this will only make us better recovery workers who can help more people, and I think that would be our goal. If we truly believe that our, quote, real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us, as AA says, we ought to be eager to do this. Modern recovery may not speak on gluttony often, but the Bible certainly does. Because of this, oh, I already read that. So now we're going to go ahead and start breaking this down a little bit. This is gluttony defined. Before we look at what the Bible has to say about gluttony, let's first define the term. So let's first define the term. So Merriam-Webster.com offers the following two definitions for gluttony. One, it's an excess in eating or drinking, and two, a greedy or excessive indulgence. Okay? Excess in eating or drinking, or greedy or excessive indulgence. So definition one is definitely what most people think about when they hear the word gluttony. We typically associate it with overeating or some sort of food addiction. I would say that this is gluttony in a specific sense, right? It specifically deals with the eating and drinking side of gluttony. Most dictionaries will give you a definition along these lines. Okay, they'll always give you a definition of excessive eating or excessive drinking, something along those lines. Webster's second definition is much less specific. Okay, the idea of overindulging is there, but it doesn't specifically mention food. So in this sense, gluttony can refer to the overdoing of just about anything. Okay, overdoing of just about anything. In this light, playing too many video games is an act of gluttony. Calling in sick to binge watch Netflix is an act of gluttony. Buying more cars than you need is an act of gluttony. Going into debt is an act of gluttony. Killing yourself to have a large bank account is an act of gluttony. Having multiple sexual partners is a form of gluttony. Gluttony is in no way limited to eating or drinking too much. It really refers to overdoing anything, good or bad, to a greedy excess, right? So, it refers to overdoing anything, good or bad, to a greedy excess. I would also like to add that on a religious level, gluttony is an attempt to fulfill oneself apart from the grace and will of God. We've been touching on that, and we're going to keep touching on it. Gluttony is an attempt to fulfill oneself apart from the grace and will of Christ. Because life is meaningless without a relationship with Christ, the world turns to any number of faulty sources for fulfillment and solution. Whether it's drugs or food or sports cars, the world searches for meaning in meaningless things. The world is desperate to fill itself apart from Christ, but it fails every time because there is no lasting meaning or satisfaction apart from Christ. You can check out 1 John 2:16. Biblically, Christ is the offer and epitome of abundance and meaning. John 10:10, right? I come to give you life abundant. I came to give you life abundant. But the world prefers to fill itself with unsatisfying things. Here's a quote from the Proverbs 27:20. Just as death and destruction are never satisfied, so human desire is never satisfied. Just as death and destruction are never satisfied, so human desire is never satisfied. And as mentioned in our opening quote from Ed Welsh, gluttony is typically numbered among the 7 deadly sins, right? The 7 deadly sins, along with pride, lust, envy, greed, sloth, and wrath. Traditionally, these specific sins are singled out because they are believed to give rise to other immoral behaviors, right? They give rise to other moral behaviors. And this means that they are more or less the root cause of our moral failings. And for that, you could always say Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, the cause of sin, in respect of one sin being the cause of another. And that's in Prima Secunda Partis Q 84, 1-2, and 84, 3. So that's from St. Thomas Aquinas' classic work on theology, the Summa Theology. Okay, now let's look at gluttony in the Scriptures. So the first explicit mention of the word gluttony in the Bible is found in Deuteronomy 21:20. Deuteronomy 21:20. Here's the text. Quote, "They shall say to the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard." He is a glutton and a drunkard. Now, unfortunately for us, this is one of the most controversial passages in the Old Testament, if not the whole Bible. Okay, this is one of the most controversial, in my eyes, verses in the Bible. Because verse 21 seems to suggest that rebellious children should be executed by the state. I'm not going to quote it, but you can go ahead and look at Deuteronomy 21:21, and it seems to suggest that rebellious children should be executed by the state. Now, obviously, that's a lazy reading of that passage, and there must be something more at play there. Without getting into a lengthy discussion about the validity of biblical law for today, I'd like to point out that this passage in Deuteronomy addresses both gluttony and drunkenness, right? Gluttony and drunkenness. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And the Bible does this a few times. Proverbs 23:20, one of our opening texts, says, "Do not be among drunkards and gluttons." Okay? In the Gospels, Christ was wrongly accused of being a glutton and a drunkard. That's in Matthew 11:19 and 7:34, because of the people that he associated with. So there's obviously some sort of connection between gluttony and drunkenness. To see the connection between gluttony and drunkenness, I think it's best to look at the word glutton in the original language. In the original language, the word glutton is zalal, okay? Zalal, which really means to squander. That's probably the easiest way to render that word, to squander, okay? The KJV translates zalal as riotous eaters or riotous eating. And you can see that at Proverbs 27:8. That was our opening text. They used the term riotous eaters there. Now, I actually prefer that translation, even though it might not be as poetic. I prefer that translation because it reinforces the idea of excessive indulgence that we discussed earlier, like that definition from Merriam-Webster, right? It really reinforces this idea of excessive indulgence. And this would mean that a glutton is one who squanders their life away through excessive and reckless living. Okay? A glutton is one who squanders their life away through excessive and reckless living. In the New Testament, Ephesians 5:18, always going there. Ephesians 5:18 says, "Do not be drunk with wine, for that is debauchery." That's just one part of that verse. Do not be drunk with wine, for this is debauchery. 1 Peter 4:3 uses similar language. You have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, right? You have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, and drunkenness, okay? Debauchery is connected with drunkenness. The word that the ESV translated as debauchery is twice translated as riot in the KJV. That word debauchery is actually translated as riot twice in the KJV. It's also translated as excess in the KJV's rendering of Ephesians 5:18. So Ephesians 5:18 and 1 Peter 4:3 seem to suggest that the drunkard is one who squanders their life away through reckless living. Okay? The drunkard is one who squanders their life away through reckless living. That is exactly what gluttony means in the Old Testament. It's exactly what it means in the Old Testament. So it's no stretch to say that gluttony and drunkenness are basically the same thing. That's the connection. They're basically the same thing. Britannica.com even includes drunkenness alongside gluttony in its essay on the 7 deadly sins. So we're obviously not the only ones picking up on this idea of drunkenness and gluttony being virtually the same thing. In modern recovery, we hear very little talk about gluttony, but in the Bible, like I said, drunkenness and gluttony are virtually synonymous. Okay? Under biblical law, they both merited the death penalty when certain conditions were met. That's seen in Deuteronomy 21:20 through 21, like I just read 20. And I believe it's implied in Proverbs 28:7, one of our opening texts. Quote, "The one who keeps the law is a son with understanding, but a companion of gluttons shames his father." Okay? So gluttony and drunkenness are shameful behaviors, and if they were not repented of under the old covenant, quote, rebellious, antisocial, and incorrigible delinquents, that's how Rushdoony puts it, can be executed as a last resort. Okay? So rebellious, antisocial, and incorrigible delinquents, like career criminals, children that were on a path to becoming career criminals, and there was obviously no sign of repenting, can be executed as a last resort. And this gives new meaning to the old recovery cliche, jails, institutions, and death. As a father, I'm sure that this was a last resort, but it was a standing law nonetheless. Right? That's just a biblical fact. I'm sure it wasn't ever enforced. That's one of the arguments. And I would make that argument too, but I think it's kind of an argument for silence, so we don't want to go there. But I'm sure it was a last resort, but I can't prove that. But it was still a standing law nonetheless. It was on the books. Just like no running stop signs is on our books. Deuteronomy 21:20 was on their books. And this was most likely implemented to reinforce the fifth commandment by teaching children to respect the authorities and to discourage them from becoming career criminals, right? So it's a little bit of the fear of the Lord written into the law code. Don't become career criminals, children, because in the last resort, you might be executed, lawfully executed. And Rushdoony made this point in his Institute of Biblical Law. Quote, the purpose of the law is to eliminate entirely a criminal element from the nation, a professional criminal class. So it's on there to deter children from becoming career criminals. So here it's important to point out that you and I don't live in a society which adheres to the Old Testament civil code. We might want that, but we don't live in a society that's currently adhering to the civil code. Yet, even with this being said, the morality of the law still applies to us. What God declared morally wrong is always morally wrong. Gluttony and drunkenness are shameful behaviors that should be avoided at all costs. And both are violations of God's will. I think that much is clear. Both are harmful behaviors which may not get us executed in modern times, right? They might not get us executed these days, but they can destroy our lives in many ways. Proverbs 28:7 tells us that gluttony shames or humiliates the family unit. And I'd say that in general, compulsive behaviors almost always have this effect. Okay? And the Puritans in the Westminster Confession, the larger catechism, question and answer 139, made this clear by including drunkenness and gluttony under the heading of the family-oriented seventh commandment. You shall not commit adultery, right? Because it's a violation of your marital vows to live a gluttonous and drunken life. It's a violation of the marital vows. It's a violation of the family unit. It does damage to the family. Proverbs 23:21 tells us that gluttony and drunkenness can lead to poverty and a general lack of motivation. I covered those things in, I think, video number 4 when I looked at the Bible and compulsive behaviors. So gluttony and drunkenness can lead to poverty and a general lack of motivation. Proverbs 21:17 says the same thing. Quote, whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man, and he who loves oil will not be rich. So whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. And the picture there is of wild parties or feasting on rich foods like those served at a banquet. So that's what that idea of who loves oil or loves oil and wine. So it's just gluttony, but just consuming a lot of rich and unhealthy foods. Banqueting, partying too much. More reckless and wild living. And Proverbs 23:3 tells us that gluttony can cause us to be deceived and manipulated by opportunists. For this reason, we are to watch what we eat and regulate our appetites. So we got to keep an eye on those things, right? It actually says in Proverbs 23:2 to put a knife to your throat if you're prone to overeating. They'll put a knife to your throat if you're prone to overeat. I don't think that's literal. You know, the commentaries are kind of interesting there, but I think the point is to keep an eye on your appetites and to keep an eye on your desires. AA's Bill Wilson wrote that, quote, "No one wants to be angry enough to murder, lustful enough to rape, gluttonous enough to ruin his health." So there's one of those AA mentions. No one wants to be gluttonous enough to ruin his health. So gluttony can have terrible consequences on our health. The CDC website has this to say about obesity, right, which is an obvious result of gluttonous eating habits. Now the argument is to say that obesity is not all owing to gluttony. I'm willing to give that, but it's one result of a gluttonous eating habits. Okay, which I don't excel in this area. I'll be the first to admit that. So again, I'm just preaching to myself. This is what the CDC says. Obesity is serious because it is associated with poor mental health outcomes and reduced quality of life. Obesity is also associated with the leading causes of death in the United States and worldwide, including diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and some types of cancer. So those are some of the results of gluttonous eating habits. So in the extreme, a gluttonous lifestyle negatively impacts the body and mind to the point of death. Okay, that's just a little bit of the sickness. That's a little bit of the issue. Now let's get into the solution here. So when talking about the 7 deadly sins, it's important to mention the 7 heavenly virtues. These are the 7 heavenly virtues. That's chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility. These virtues are called heavenly because they oppose the 7 deadly sins. They oppose the 7 deadly sins. For example, humility opposes pride, and charity opposes greed, right? It's like the opposite. Think of that. These are the opposites of the deadly sins. So, humility is the opposite of pride, and love and charity is the opposite of greed. So sobriety or temperance opposes gluttony. It's the opposite of gluttony. And these are also called the heavenly virtues because they are cultivated in our lives by the Holy Spirit to counteract the deadly sins that we are prone to commit. So in simple terms, this means that whichever of the deadly sins that we favor, the Holy Spirit provides an equivalent solution. So whichever one of these we prefer, right? We might not always commit all the 7. There might be some that we struggle with more. The Holy Spirit provides an equivalent solution. That's the beauty of it. And I'm always thinking 1 Corinthians 10, 12 through 13. Hello to whoever's watching. How's it going? Actually, I'm going to read that. We're just freestyling anyways. First Corinthians 10, 12 through 13. And I've done at least one video talking about 1 Corinthians 10, 2 videos, and it's also the series introduction to my Living Recovery discussion books. So here's 1 Corinthians 10, 12 through 13 with no commentary. We're just going to read it and move on. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. Okay? And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Right? So God provides what does He say? He provides a way out so that you can endure it. That's that equivalent solution provided by the Holy Spirit. So to counteract our gluttony, the Holy Spirit cultivates temperance in our hearts. He cultivates temperance in our hearts. Temperance can be understood as moderation, abstinence, and self-restraint. Okay? Temperance can be understood as moderation, abstinence, and self-restraint or self-control. Galatians 5:23 even lists self-control as one of the fruits of the Spirit, while drunkenness and gluttony by implication are listed as works of the flesh in Galatians 5:21. So self-control, fruit of the Spirit; drunkenness and gluttony, works of the flesh. Okay? Ultimately, temperance is cultivated in our lives through the work of the Holy Spirit. I got to stress that. It's ultimately, temperance is cultivated in our lives through the work of the Holy Spirit, but it's something that we should desire, value, and strive for. I think 2 Peter 1:5 there, obviously. My dog's going to town on her stuffed animals. Yet we should always remember that it is the Lord who works in us to will and to work for His good pleasure. That's Philippians 2:13. We should always remember that it's the Lord who works in us to will and to work for His good pleasure, right? So this is what they call a virtuous circle, really. It's kind of a virtuous circle because God works in us. He stirs up this desire in us, and therefore we go desire what He stirs in us. So He stirs this desire for temperance. He stirs temperance within us, so therefore we desire temperance. It's beautiful. This is beautiful theology here. On our own, we are intemperate, right? On our own, we are intemperate. We are inebriates. It's just a fancy word for drunkenness. I don't know why I use that term there. We are intemperate. We are inebriates. We do not practice self-restraint. As powerless people, we run from one extreme to another to sate our appetites or to calm the meaninglessness of life apart from a relationship with Christ. I think that's a picture of humanity and a picture of the addict. Addicts and alcoholics aren't exactly known for their self-restraint, right? The AA book goes as far as to call alcoholics those who have, quote, lost the power and choice in drink. The NA book says that addicts cannot control their using for any length of time. So how then are we to practice temperance? How are we to defeat our gluttonous behaviors? And that's exactly the point. We can't. We cannot. In our own power, we fail every time. Our personal testimonies have proven this beyond a shadow of a doubt. I know mine has. I don't know if yours has. I'm pretty sure it has. For the addict and the glutton, this great weakness is actually our greatest source of strength. Okay, this is our great source of strength. When we admit we can't govern our own appetites, we are ready to be governed by the governor of all. We are ready to be governed by the governor of all. When we admit our difficulties with self-government, we are ready to consciously rely upon the Lord who makes temperance possible. The God who commands us to be self-controlled and sober-minded in 1 Peter 4:7 is the very God who makes this an actuality. Okay? He commands it, right? He commands it. He gives us that command. But He produces what He commands. Okay? The God who commands us to be self-controlled is the very God who makes this an actuality. We cannot do this on our own. All we do is give ourselves to the raging appetites of our battered hearts. Our salvation, our recovery, must come from without because it can't come from within. It's not going to come from within us. It has to come from outside. It has to come from a power greater than us, which is God. A leper cannot change its spots, just as Jeremiah 23:13 says. And gluttons can't end their gluttony through their own power. And gluttons can't end their gluttony through their own power. God must work in us to will and to work for His good pleasure. God must work in us to will and to work for His good pleasure. So I'm going to briefly summarize this and end this video. So as I mentioned earlier, Merriam-Webster.com defines gluttony as greedy or excessive indulgence. While we most often associate gluttony with overeating, it really applies to anything that we overdo. This means that cell phone usage can be gluttonous, playing video games can be gluttonous, reading and writing can become gluttonous. Whatever we tend to overdo, good or bad, can be an act of gluttony. In the extreme, these gluttonous behaviors can negatively impact our mental and physical health. And then I said that the solution to the gluttony problem is self-restraint. The solution to the gluttony problem is self-restraint. This is a virtue that must be worked in us by the Holy Spirit. We can value it and chase it, like 2 Peter 1:5, but on our own strength we will give in to our gluttonous desires every time. The Lord must work in us to work and to will for His good pleasure. The Lord must work in us to work and to will for His good pleasure. All right, with that, people, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. That was my message on gluttony and temperance. Hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, I don't know what's going to happen next week. Maybe I'll just do a little off-the-cup kind of thing about gratitude because it's Thanksgiving. I'm also toying around with maybe starting the Advent series maybe on Saturday or something like that, because the first Sunday in Advent is going to be not this coming Sunday, but the next Sunday, so on the 29th. That'll be the first Sunday in Advent. So that's what's going to be coming up. I'm going to hopefully do something, maybe doing another little Psalms or something. I like to do these things, and I hope you guys enjoy them. So that's why I keep doing it. With that being said, it's been kind of a long week. I'm a little bit under the weather. As you can tell, I'm a little bit sniffly. And I think it's time for me to curl up and go to bed. But I love you guys, and I will see you around. Have a good one.